According to Japan's traditional Shinto faith, our world is inhabited by countless spirits. In fact, there's even an old expression that says 8 million kami surround us in the mountains, the seas, the forests, and even in the very air that we breathe. Some of them are playful tricksters. Others are wrathful beings that can bring calamity if angered. But how exactly did the Japanese come to believe in such demons and spirits? And furthermore, what exactly is a demon in the Shinto context? And how were these entities understood and dealt with across history? I'm sure you'll admit, Shinto demonology, it probably wasn't on your list of things to talk about today. But now that you're here, let's get into it together. Far from the simplistic notion of demons as purely evil beings, Shinto demonology is a rather complex world, and that line between demon and god can certainly be quite a blurry one. But don't think that we're here to twist things around like some horror movie clickbait. We're only interested in the facts of it. It's not a ghost story. It's not a fantasy. It's just traditional Shinto theology. So keep an open mind as we begin. Perhaps you might encounter something you did not expect. In any case, all manner of otherworldly beings await you, should you choose to spend the next hour with me. Now, allow me to welcome you to the channel. It's always good manners to do so, isn't it? If you've not subscribed yet, I invite you to do so, only if you feel inclined, and for those returning, it's good to see you again. Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Where are you listening from? What time is it in your part of the world? Now, this video is 100% ad-free, along with all the other videos on this channel, for your uninterrupted enjoyment. This is made possible by the generous contributions of those on Patreon, YouTube memberships, the occasional donation on PayPal or YouTube, super thanks, and also those who checked out the merch store. A few little Japanese goodies on there too, if you are curious. Well, with all that said and done, let's get nice and relaxed, and we can begin our dive into Shinto demonology. Now, if you are starting from a foundation of not really understanding what the Shinto worldview is, I don't really blame you. It's a little bit of a niche topic. So let's first just get a grasp on the Shinto worldview of kami. You heard that word in the introduction, didn't you? But the term kami in Japanese is often translated as gods or spirits. But it's a bit of an umbrella term, a broad range of sacred or numinous entities. You'll get the grasp of it as we keep going along. Now, kami can be deities of awe-inspiring natural phenomena, like the sun, the mountains, the sea, etc., the spirits of ancestors, too, or even local spirits of a village, or even an object. In Shinto thought, the world is inherently sacred and alive. Everything notable or strange may have a spirit attached to it. Traditional law speaks of the Yaoyorozu no Kami, that is literally 8 million kami, to signify an infinite multitude of spirits present in everyday life. And unlike Western religions, these spirits are not strictly divided into good and evil camps. It's a little bit more complicated than that. Each kami is a being with its own personality and mood, and as a matter of fact, Shinto traditions often say that a deity has 2 souls or aspects, a gentle, harmonious side called the Nigi Mitama, and a wild, rough side, Ara Mitama. Now, the aramitama aspect of a kami can manifest as violent or dangerous if the deity is provoked, or if perhaps the proper rituals are neglected. Thus, a god who is normally benevolent and friendly might take the mask off and become demonic in its rage, a concept quite different from an absolute evil demonic figure. Now, crucially, in Shinto there is no single personification of evil, nothing like the devil in more Christian theology. Instead, misfortunes and malevolent events are often attributed to either an upset kami or perhaps to wayward spirits. Some kami are, however, explicitly seen as troublemakers or destructive forces when not appeased. And classical texts do refer to the Araburu kami or the Makatsui no kami, essentially wild or calamitous deities who can cause illness, disorder, and disaster on varying scales. But these are not evil in a moral sense. Rather, they are embodiments of the chaotic and dangerous side of nature and existence, which, if you have the peaceful side, you have to have the other side of it too. The response in Shinto is typically to pacify or balance these forces, not to cast them aside as irredeemable, malevolent devils. It's just part of nature. Offerings, prayers, and rituals are given to angry kami or wandering spirits to soothe them, so that harmony can be restored. In other words, we can put it this way: Shinto demonology is rooted in restoring balance between the spiritual world and the human world. And then there's another key concept, that is kegare, that is impurity, versus purity being harae. Evil or demonic influence in Shinto are often linked to pollution or impurity rather than to a sin in an evil sense. Death, blood, and disease, they're all sources of kegare impurity that attract or generate harmful spirits. For example, if someone dies with a strong negative emotion or in a traumatic way, this spirit may linger as polluted, an angry, malevolent force that can't rest. Human misdeeds or violations of the natural order, called tsumi, or pollutions or offenses, can likewise breed calamity if not properly cleansed. As humans are thought to be fundamentally pure in Shinto belief, these kinds of defilements are considered to be temporary conditions that can be corrected through purification. And there's that word, purification. We also have ritual purification practices, and they're quite important. Washing with water, sprinkling salt, or even the grand ceremonies of O Harae, the great purification performed twice yearly. They're all aimed at expelling impurities and any clinging malevolent spirits. And just a quick note on language. When you hear this prefix O in Japanese, it usually means something big, or it's placed as an honorific. So, one may say that Shinto's demonology is actually more of a system of preventative medicine for spiritual well-being of community and environment, keeping those unquiet spirits at bay through cleanliness, offerings, and reverence. Of course, there's different opinions on it, but that's boiled down to its simplest definitions for the point of just building a foundation to understand this from. But do keep in mind that it's also important to note that from early on, Shinto beliefs were coexisting and influenced by other belief systems such as Buddhism and Taoism, which introduced their own concepts of hell, ghosts, and demons. By the first millennium CE, the Japanese did not sharply distinguish whether a troublesome spirit was Shinto or Buddhist in nature. No, the goal was just to avert danger. Thus, Shinto shrines and Buddhist temples often worked in tandem to address supernatural threats. This syncretic environment gave rise to a rich variety of demonological ideas. For instance, the word oni, usually translated as demon or ogre, is written with a Chinese character meaning a dead or hidden spirit. In Chinese, it is pronounced gui, and usually means pretty much the same thing, but has more of a ghost connotation. The notion of horned, man-eating oni was partly imported through Buddhist and Chinese folklore, yet it merged seamlessly with Japan's indigenous spirit beliefs. In Shinto context, though, oni and similar beings were seen as just another category of a troublesome spirit, to be repelled as needed. So there's your introduction, and we must understand things within this context. Shinto provides us with a world alive with spirits. Some can bless, some can harm. Sometimes it depends on their mood. And evil is not an external cosmic adversary, but a matter of impurity, imbalance, or a soul in anger. And so now we can explore how, across time, the Japanese identified certain beings as demons and developed stories and rituals around them. Shinto demonology will certainly reveal itself as a continuum from the mythical gods who punish and test, to ghostly apparitions and shapeshifters that challenge the living, and of course, to those enduring cultural practices that try to keep all of these forces in check. So, let's get to the records of Shinto. Where exactly do we get all this information from? But in terms of our primary sources, the contemporary records of the time, the oldest recorded myths are found in the 8th century chronicles, the Kojiki, the record of the ancient matters. And when we say 8th century, more particularly, it's 712. We also have the Nihon Shoki, the Chronicles of Japan, chronicled 8 years later in 720. Now, why are these texts important? Well, they recount the creation of the islands of Japan and the deeds of the first kami. While their main purpose was to legitimize imperial lineage, they also incidentally contain early examples of demon-like entities and, more than a few, dangerous spirits. The way these old primordial stories describe the netherworld and monstrous beings certainly laid that groundwork for the later Japanese conception of demonic forces. One of the most dramatic episodes is the myth of Izanagi and Izanami, the divine couple who created the land. When the goddess Izanami dies giving birth to a fire god, she descends into Yomi. That is a shadowy land of death. Grief-stricken, the god Izanagi ventures into Yomi to retrieve his beloved wife. But Izanami warns him not to look upon her, as she has partaken of the food of the underworld, blinding her there. If you know your Greek mythology, you might be raising a few eyebrows at the moment. Well, of course, overcome by curiosity or perhaps a little bit of concern, Izanagi breaks that taboo and lights a torch, only to behold a horrifying sight. Izanami's once beautiful body is now a decaying corpse, teeming with maggots, and from her remains have sprung the 8 thunder deities, Yatsukami, crackling, coiling all around her. Well, this terrifying image in the Kojiki is essentially a proto-demonic scene, the birth of a wrathful storm god from the rotting goddess. Izanami, humiliated and enraged at being seen in this awful state, flies into a fury, As Izanagi turns to flee in terror, she screams that she will kill him for this betrayal. The Kojiki relates that Izanami calls forth a horde of fearsome underworld spirits to chase Izanagi, and among them is the Yomotsu Shikome, often translated as the Hag of Yomi, a furious female demon of the afterlife. As for Izanagi, he barely escapes, racing out of the underworld, pursued by this vengeful she-demon and an army of ravenous spirits. He manages to block the passage between worlds by rolling a huge boulder across the entrance to Yomi. From the other side of that boulder, the enraged Izanami, who is now transformed into a fearsome, cursing entity, shouts that she will strangle 1,000 living people every single day in revenge. Well, Izanagi has a plan to balance that out. He says that he will ensure 1,500 are born each day, securing the balance of life and death. Not sure how he's going to do that. I don't think he means it in a practical sense. In any case, this founding myth, we see an archetype that will echo throughout Japanese lore, and that is of the wronged woman and her wrath birthing a demonic force. Also the idea that ritual acts, sealing the cave, purifying afterwards, are needed to contain the pollution of death and anger. But the story's not quite over yet. After escaping from Yomi, Izanagi himself undergoes a ritual purification to cleanse the impurity of death from his body. According to myth, many new kami are born from this act of cleansing. Notably, he washes his eyes and nose. He gives birth to the sun goddess Amaterasu, the moon god Tsukuyomi, and the storm god Susanoo. But significantly, the act of cleansing also produces minor deities of impurity and disaster, and they are known as Magatsuhi no Kami. These are essentially the kami of calamity, that is the translation roughly, spiritual residue of Yomi's pollution, and this suggests that misfortune and malign spirits are inescapable byproducts of this cosmic order, present from the very beginning and will be present till the very end. Other early Japanese texts thus acknowledged that along with the divine light came darker forces that needed to be acknowledged and appeased. But Shinto myth also features monstrous creatures that later generations viewed as demons in a pretty strict sense. The famous example is the Yamata no Orochi, the eight-headed, eight-tailed dragon or serpent. The Kojiki's narrative says that the storm god Susanoo, during his wanderings on earth, encounters an elderly woman weeping because a terrible serpent has devoured 7 of their 8 daughters, and the last daughter's turn is coming up soon. The Orochi is described as so gigantic that its body spans 8 hills and valleys, its belly forever bloody and inflamed. Susanoo devises a clever plan to kill the beast. He has the couple brew exceedingly strong sake, which, it's kind of rice wine in Japan if you don't know, and set out 8 vats of it. The 8-headed dragon arrives, and finding the sake irresistibly fragrant, plunges each of its heads into the vats to drink. And soon, the Orochi becomes thoroughly drunk. When the monster is incapacitated, Susanoo drew his sword and sliced the Orochi into pieces, cutting off each head. In the tail of the serpent, his sword hit something hard, and it revealed the divine sword known as Kusanagi, which he takes as a trophy. The sword later becomes one of the imperial regalia, by the way. Now, this myth of Susanoo slaying the dragon is Japan's equivalent of a heroic demon slayer tale, their very own Hercules-like character. The Orochi embodies a terrifying, chaotic force of nature, perhaps originally a symbol of floods and storms, and Susanoo's victory symbolizes the taming of wild nature. But what is really notable in a Shinto context is that Susanoo himself is a kami with a troubling reputation. He was cast out of heaven for his violent antics. No one really thought he'd be going and doing such a deed as this. Yet, here we are, and he functions as a protector by destroying this demonic menace. Once again, the line between god and demon can be quite thin. Susanoo's ferocity can be either harmful or beneficial. It all depends on the context. And as for Orochi, though monstrous, it is treated as just another part of that tapestry of kami and creatures. Other early Japanese legends and regional folklore mention various strange beings. These are recorded in sources like the Fudoki Chronicles of the 8th century. We hear of wicked spirits of the mountains and rivers that demand sacrifices, or animal spirits that bewitch travelers. Though not all are detailed in the imperial chronicles, archaeology and oral tradition suggest that the Japanese attributed spiritual agency to things like the fox and the snake as early as prehistoric times. Let's take this for an example. The snake or serpent was often venerated as a water deity, but also feared and potentially dangerous, a very malevolent spirit if provoked. There is one myth. A water serpent annually demands a young maiden until the hero intervenes, a theme similar to the Orochi story. Such tales illustrate that from the dawn of the Shinto mythology, the Japanese had certainly recognized a class of supernatural beings that we might call demons, threatening creatures, ghosts that cause harm. Of course, they must only be dealt with by rituals. And if that doesn't work, wait for the hero to show up. But it is noting before we move on that while Shinto myths themselves do not moralize these creatures as evil in a Christian sense, they clearly identify them as forces of destruction or chaos. The response is typically either confrontation or ritual appeasement. These twin approaches, fighting demons versus just pacifying them, remain quite a duality in the Japanese tradition. And so as we move forward in time, we will see periods where one approach dominates. Sometimes it's the exorcist hero archetype, while other times the appeasement approach is the front and center. Now, as we enter the classical era of Japanese history, centered on the Heian period, that is 794 to 1185, by the way, the capital city, which is now Kyoto, in that time called Heian-kyo, became not only a hub of aristocratic culture, but also, in the minds of the people, a haunt for restless ghosts and malignant spirits. Now, just a quick little detour. If you want to see this represented in a interesting medium, look up the game Cosmology of Kyoto. It is interesting, to say the least. In any case, let's get back to the Shinto demonology. Well, it is this era, the Heian period, that provides some of the clearest historical examples of what we might term as Shinto demonology in practice, though again the cosmology was a mix of Shinto Buddhism and folk belief. In the refined society of the Heian court, natural disasters, plagues, political misfortunes, they were often blamed on a rather interesting creature called an Onryō, literally grudging or vengeful spirit. Now, these were usually the souls of persons who had died with strong resentment, especially those who were wronged or mistreated in life. Rather than departing peacefully to the ancestral beyond, an Onryō spirit would linger in the living world to wreak havoc on those who had offended it, or even on the state at large. Now, the notion of an Onryō reflects a deep-seated idea in Japanese culture, and that is the idea that the unsettled dead can wield so much enormous destructive power only until they are placated. The aristocrats of the time took such ghostly grudges very, very seriously. Now let's look at the 9th century court chronicle, that is the Nihon Sandai Jitsuroku. Now, by the way, just a quick aside into language again. You will hear Japan being mentioned too as two different things. That word Nihon is more of a casual rendering, but Nippon with two P's, that is Nippon, is a little bit more in a formal context. In any case, well, that Nihon Sandai Jitsuroku and various other diaries of nobles record a few strange incidents. Sudden outbreaks of disease, lightning striking important buildings, or even key political figures inexplicably falling ill seemingly out of nowhere. Frequently, a diviner or an onmyoji, a yin-yang divination specialist, would be consulted to identify the supernatural cause. The onmyoji, a professional in the line of esoteric onmyodo system that combined astrology, feng shui, and magic, might determine, for example, that the angry spirit of so-and-so is responsible for whatever calamity that had befallen the state or the individual or the family. At that point, the court would respond with rituals to appease the spirit. Now, this could involve Buddhist masses to comfort the dead, Shinto ceremonies of pacification, and often the posthumous elevation of the angry spirit to a more benevolent status. And we have one famous case. It involved Prince Sawara, that is the imperial prince Sawara no Miya, the younger brother of the Emperor Kanmu in the 8th century. Sawara had been disgraced and exiled. This was under the suspicion of treason, and he died in that exile, likely, it is said, by starving himself in protest. Soon afterwards, Kyoto, or Heian-kyo at the time, was beset by a series of misfortunes, fires, violent storms, even an epidemic, which people whispered were caused by Prince Sawara's enraged spirit seeking vengeance for the injustice he suffered. But the court was deeply alarmed by this, and so they took extraordinary measures. They posthumously pardoned the prince, and even declared him to be emperor, bestowing the title of Sudo Tenno, and enshrined him as a kami at the new shrine. They even moved the capital for from a short-lived site at Nagaoka back to Heian-kyo, in part because of the perceived spiritual disaster linked to Sawara's curse. Now, in time, these gestures apparently calmed the disturbances. Prince Sawara's case did set a precedent, a very Shinto way of handling demonic wrath. Turn the vengeful ghost into a protective deity by showing it respect and giving it a place of honor. In other words, convert the vengeful Onryō into a guardian kami, a kind of otherworldly reconciliation. But perhaps the most renowned Onryō story is that of Sugawara no Michizane, a high-ranking scholar official in the 9th century. Michizane was brilliant and quite a popular statesman, but fell victim to court intrigues and was exiled far from the capital, where he died in 903. Well, that wasn't quite the end of it. After his death, Kyoto was struck by disaster. Lightning repeatedly hit the imperial palace, setting it on fire. Plagues and droughts also afflicted the land. Michizane's chief political rivals from the Fujiwara clan died in quick succession, and a son of the emperor suddenly passed away as well. Of course, people whispered in terror that it was Michizane's Onryō, furious at the injustice that had been done unto him, now manifesting as a powerful thunder god striking from the heavens. The court tried various appeasement rituals. According to one record from 955, a young boy through spirit possession conveyed a message that the angry spirit of Michizane had become the Raijin, the deity of thunder and calamity, and demanded to be honored. The authorities responded by dedicating a grand Shinto shrine in Kyoto to him, that is the Kitano Tenmangu, and posthumously restoring his titles and rank. So Michizane's spirit was now symbolically transformed into what is known as a tenjin, a benevolent kami of scholarship. Indeed, to this day, Tenjin is worshipped as the patron deity of learning, and students across Japan pray to him for success in exams, perhaps unaware that he began as a fearsome ghost, or perhaps very well aware. The transformation of Michizane from the dreaded demon to revered god shows a core theme in Shinto demonology. The demon is often a god in disguise, angered by mistreatment, who needs to be pacified and showed reverence. Throughout the Heian period, the capital saw many ceremonies called Goryō-e, that is, rites for honorable spirits, intended to soothe Onryō and other harmful deities. Well, these were elaborate affairs. Some were Buddhist rituals where monks chanted sutras for the dead. Others were Shinto festivals with music and dance to please the spirits. Sometimes Shinto priests, Buddhist monks, and Onmyoji diviners all collaborated in these events, reflecting an integrated approach. And the logic of it all was pragmatic. Whether the danger came from a malignant kami or a restless ghost, it needed to be calmed. In effect, the Heian court had developed a kind of state-sponsored demonology, identifying, naming, and neutralizing spiritual threats to the realm. Literature of the era also reveals the fear of vengeful spirits. Classical works like the Tale of Genji from 1008 hint at it. In one famous episode, the living jealous spirit of Genji's former lover, Lady Rokujo, possesses and kills Genji's new wife, a scene that was later popularized, by the way, in No Theatre as the play Ai no Ue, Aoi no Ue. Collections of tales from the 12th century, such as Konjaku Monogatarishu, that is, the tales of times now past, are filled with ghostly encounters and demonic stories that circulated in both elite and popular imagination. For example, one Konjaku tale tells of a nobleman who boasted he could face any demon. To test his mettle, he went one night to the bridge at Agi in Omi province, a spot reputed to be very haunted. It was there he met a beautiful young woman who seemed to be in distress. But when he let his guard down, the woman transformed into a towering Oni and attacked him. The man barely escaped with his life, quite chastened but no longer as boastful. Well, stories like this were moral lessons wrapped up in a ghostly garb. They reinforced that human arrogance or wrongdoing could invite supernatural punishment. At the same time, they enriched the lore of what demons looked and acted like. The Oni in this story was 9 feet tall, with wild hair, often described as having an ugly, bestial face. Certainly not something you want to encounter on a night out, that's for sure. Well, we've certainly talked in a good bit of detail about the Onryō, those vengeful spirits, but we did mention before the Oni, and it's pretty important that we go into them in great detail too. No discussion of Japanese demonology is complete without that. You ask any Japanese person to draw a demon, and they'll sketch an Oni, typically a hulking, horned ogre with sharp teeth wild and messy hair wearing a tiger skin loincloth. Oh, and don't forget that massive iron club, too. Can't go without that. Well, this image is so ingrained that it might be surprising to learn that the Oni's origin is a blend of imported and native ideas. The Oni, as we know it today, crystallized in the medieval era, drawing on ancient, indigenous ghost lore, as well as the ogres and hell wardens of Buddhism. Over time, Oni became a kind of catch-all symbol for evil and misfortune in Japan. Yet interestingly, Oni are not always purely malevolent in the stories. Now, you see the word Oni in Chinese characters, pronounced Gui in Chinese, literally means something like the hidden one or spirit of the dead, although translations from those original Chinese characters are always a little bit touch and go, but you get the point. In any case, early Japanese uses of the term referred generally to scary, invisible spirits that caused illness or disaster. By the Heian period, Oni were frequently mentioned as tangible creatures, especially in Buddhist texts describing the hells. In the Buddhist view, Oni are the demons that populate the underworld, punishing sinners at the command of King Yama, that is, Enma Diao in Japanese. Now, monks preached about the torments of hell to instill morality, complete with vivid depictions of horned demons boiling the wicked in cauldrons or ripping them apart. These gruesome images filtered into popular imagination, and Oni soon came to be visualized in artwork and literature. By the medieval era, roughly 12th to 16th centuries in Japan, Oni were often depicted as red or blue-skinned humanoids, with sharp claws, 2 long horns, and a monstrous face. Features that we certainly see carried over into depictions today. The tiger skin loincloth and iron club, that legendary kanabo, were added attributes that accentuated their brute strength and exoticism. You see, tigers were not native to Japan, so tiger skin showed that otherworldly nature of an Oni. In folklore, Oni are blamed for everything from causing diseases to kidnapping children. There is a saying in Japanese, Oni no yonna. It means something devilishly awful or powerful. Well, in many village tales, Oni live in remote mountains or caves, menacing humans until a brave warrior, or perhaps even a clever peasant, outwits them. For example, the pretty quintessential legend of Momotaro, that is the Peach Boy. It features a young hero who travels to Oni Island to defeat the band of Oni plaguing his homeland. With the help of animal companions, Momotaro subdues the Oni and takes back their stolen treasure. This story, though a mere folk tale, it likely codified in the Edo period and shows how Oni had become stock standard villains, that them in the us and them equation that must be overcome to restore peace and prosperity. Oh, and don't forget the balance. All about the balance. However, Oni aren't always just simple villains. They also embody the theme of transformation of good into evil and evil into good, rather, as we saw with the Onryō. Buddhist folklore in Japan tells of some Oni who turned into protectors. One legend speaks of a monk so pious that when he died, he chose to be reborn into an Oni in order to guard the temple that he loved, scaring away any who would harm it. Such benevolent Oni remain fierce in appearance, but their actions serve the Dharma, that is the Buddhist law, or just the community's good. That line, not all demons are evil, became part of the Japanese law, and in fact, medieval Setsuya tales include clever inversions, such as an anecdote where an official says, "Real Oni know right from wrong," and that's what makes them truly frightening, suggesting that the worst demons are the ones who have moral agency, but still choose cruelty. Conversely, an Oni that acts righteously is perhaps more admirable than a human that does not. Oni as personifications of misfortune also gave rise specifically to rituals to drive them away and invite good fortune. The most famous is Setsubun, which is still practiced every year in early February. During Setsubun, people perform a ceremony called the Tsuina, or Oni-arai, that is the expelling of the Oni. At shrines, temples, and even at homes, roasted soybeans are thrown, while participants shout Oni wa soto, fuku wa uchi, meaning out with the demons, in with good fortune. Well, it's pretty charming, isn't it? Symbolically pelting demons with beans. The idea actually is that beans thought to be purifying will hurt and repel the malevolent spirits. Some say they only flee because the beans resemble pebbles used in the old myth to trick Izanami's pursuing hag. In any case, in many households, a family member might don an Oni mask and play the role of the demon being chased out the door by laughter and bean throwing. And the ritual is half serious, half festive today. But its origin certainly lies in ancient palace ceremonies recorded as early as the Heian period, where the emperor's court would enact the driving away of demons at the turn of the seasons to ensure a prosperous new year. A direct example of how Shinto and folk practices merged to manage the demonic threat. Not by a grand battle of absolute good and evil, no revelations here, but by an annual house cleaning, cleansing away bad influences, demonic and otherwise, to start afresh. Who knows? Maybe it's all metaphorical. But the persona of Oni also took on a symbolic role in society. By the Edo period, 1603 to 1868, Oni were so popular in art and theatre that they were even used satirically. In No and Kabuki plays, actors donned ferocious Oni masks to portray the inner human passions like jealousy or rage. Many folk tales portrayed the Onare, or female Oni, where a woman driven by jealousy or sorrow literally transforms into a demon, horns and fangs included, a concept that ties back to Izanami and Lady Rokujo's rage. The stories often had a moral. Unchecked negative emotion could turn anyone into a monster. Conversely, Edo period people enjoyed sometimes making light of Oni. Small carvings called netsuke from that era show Oni being comically chased by beans or subdued by folk heroes, and that shows a level of playfulness with the once dreaded image. It was also a way to psychologically tame one's own fears. By laughing at the demon, you rob it of its power. All in all, the Oni is pretty complex, don't you think? It can represent the embodiment of disaster, plague, war, and famine, such as the belief that if somebody died of a terrible illness, their spirit might become an Oni, and it can represent the dark side of human nature. But through rituals like Setsubun and countless stories of Oni being defeated or even reformed, Japanese culture traditionally sought to keep an Oni at the margins. They are acknowledged as part of the cosmos, yet firmly told, "You're not welcome here. Please leave." And sometimes, a redeemed Oni might even become an unlikely ally of humans, as long as harmony is maintained. Now that's where the nuance comes in, treating demons with a mix of fear and respect and humor. That's the hallmark of Shinto-influenced demonology. Now, beyond the specific category of Oni, Japan's imagination teems with a vast menagerie of yokai. Now, what is this term yokai? Let's translate it. Basically, it means strange apparition, maybe even mysterious phenomenon, and it serves as an umbrella for all manner of supernatural creatures and ghosts. While not all yokai are demonic in the sense of evil, many have trickster or dangerous traits. Within a Shinto context, yokai are often seen as minor kami or spirits of a place or object, sometimes benign, sometimes harmful, essentially the spiritual wildlife populating the borderlands of our human realm. From medieval times onward, people told countless stories about encounters of yokai. So let's get to know a few of them. They're pretty essential to the demonological landscape of the Shinto tradition. First, we have the tengu, often called goblins or mountain demons. Tengu are winged, beak-nosed or long-nosed creatures dwelling in remote mountains and forests. Early depictions show them as bird-like humanoids, sometimes with actual bird heads. They were blamed for frightening woodcutters, abducting monks, or leading people astray in the wilderness. Tengu were originally seen as malicious demons of pride and strife. In some legends, fallen, arrogant priests became tengu. However, by the late medieval period and into the Edo, tengu underwent a remarkable evolution in character. There are some stories that portray them as stern but wise mountain guardians. They could tutor worthy monks in secret knowledge, or even offer their protection to certain temples. By the 18th and 19th centuries, rural folk venerated tengu as part of as a type of local kami in the mountains. People would leave offerings before entering a peak to avoid offending the tengu. And even today, festivals in mountain villages may involve tengu masks or dances honoring these creatures. A tengu's appearance in art ranges from the grotesque birdman to a more human-like figure, just with an extremely long nose that's said to signify supernatural status. Kinda hard to mix. Anyway, this dual nature, both perilous trickster and possible ally, it made the tengu one of the most intriguing yokai. And then we have the fox, kitsune. In Japanese folklore, foxes are very intelligent creatures, and they also have magical abilities, especially the power to shapeshift into human form, often into a beautiful woman or perhaps a beggar. A kitsune may be a faithful guardian or a playful trickster depending on the tale. And Shinto has a special relationship with foxes, by the way, through the deity Inari, the god or goddess of fertility, rice, prosperity, whose sacred messengers are all white foxes. Inari shrines are famously adorned with fox statues. These foxes are benevolent, protecting the shrine's rice granaries from pests. But outside the shrine precincts, foxes could be quite mischievous. Countless Edo period stories tell of foxes beguiling humans. A lonely man marries a mysterious woman who's later revealed to be just a fox in disguise, or foxes producing illusory fires at night to lure travelers astray from their path. In many cases, the fox's trick is morally ambiguous, sometimes punishing greed or vanity in the victim. People in old Japan both feared and respected foxes. Fox possession was a dreaded condition. If someone exhibited erratic behavior or madness, villagers might suspect a fox spirit had entered them, a condition called kitsunetsuki. Well, in a case like that, you'd need a Shinto priest or a folk medium to perform an exorcism, coaxing or forcing the fox out. Yet on the other hand, a fox might also bring blessings. There are tales of foxes rewarding kind humans with riches or saving someone from danger. Okay, next we have the tanuki, commonly translated as raccoon dog. The tanuki is another shapeshifter of folklore. They're typically portrayed as jolly and bumbling tricksters. Legends often show them transforming into monks or teapots to trick people, though usually their pranks are more comedic than dangerous. No harm done. One famous 16th century folk tale from the collection Otogizoshi recounts the Bunbuku Chagama, wherein the tanuki transforms into a tea kettle and gets inadvertently taken to a temple. Unable to maintain the form, it reverts halfway, resulting in a half-tanuki, half-kettle creature that becomes a beloved temple treasure performing dances. Unlike the often eerie fox, the tanuki is seen as a bit more benign, if even a little foolish, depending on the interpretation. In Shinto villages, tanuki spirits were considered of the wild, not worshipped, but acknowledged with a bit of good humor. To this day, ceramic statues of plump, cheerful tanuki are placed outside restaurants and shops as good luck charms, carrying a comically oversized flask of sake. It's a kind of jovial demon, not something to be afraid of. Well, then we have the yurei, which are something to be afraid of. Well, these are not exactly yokai species like the above, but the general term for ghosts of the dead. It literally means faint soul. Now, yurei appear in countless stories, usually a pale woman with long disheveled head in a white burial kimono. An iconic image still seen in Japanese horror films. The concept of yurei overlaps with Onryō, as discussed earlier. During the Edo period, ghost stories became a hugely popular entertainment, giving rise to famous tales like the Black Hare and the Lantern Ghost. Many of these were compiled in collections such as the Ugetsu Monogatari of 1776 by Ueda Akinari, or recounted in kabuki plays, still to this day actually. Even though Buddhism handled much of the afterlife rituals, Shinto shrines too played a role where they could. For example, many communities had and still have small shrines at the sites of tragic death to calm a local spirit. The summer Bon festival is when the souls of the dead return to their families. It's of Buddhist origin, but widely observed. There's a time when ghost stories are traditionally told. The prevalence of yurei stories in Edo, Japan, led to a sort of demonology of ghost types. The ubume, a mother ghost carrying a baby, the goryō, aristocratic vengeful spirit, and the zashiki warashi, a child ghost that haunts the home benignly, and so on. Now, while not demons in a Western sense, these ghosts were part of the spectrum of beings that Shinto practitioners would seek to appease to avoid any trouble. Perhaps they just want to avoid them altogether. It's a good idea. And again shows the broad scope of demonic beings in Japanese thought. Now, our last category we're going to talk about is the tsukumogami, one of the most charming and unique categories of yokai. It literally means artifact spirit. Now, according to a widespread medieval belief, any object that has served for 100 years could develop a spirit and come to life on its 100th anniversary. The idea appears in the Muromachi period, which is the 14th to 16th centuries, and is documented in Era's literature. For example, a famous 16th century illustrated scroll called the Tsukumogami Emake depicts the abandoned household utensils, broken tools, old umbrellas, sandals, that kind of thing, springing to life as mischievous creatures. And so they band together in the night to take revenge on the people who threw them away carelessly. Kinda sounds like Toy Story, doesn't it? We're not aiming for the truck. Well, this whimsical notion reflects Shinto's animistic core. You see, even the seemingly inanimate have spirits that deserve respect. So look after the things you've got, and if an object is used respectively, its spirit remains peaceful. But if cast off in anger or neglect, it may become a resentful little demon. No one wants one of them chasing after you. Even today, some shrines hold ceremonies for old dolls or needles, thanking and laying to rest their spirits so they do not become angry tsukumogami. And while tsukumogami tales were often light-hearted or satirical in tone, they certainly carried a message for reverence for all things. Every item around you, in the Shinto worldview, has the potential for life, and shouldn't be wantonly mistreated. Of course, this barely scratches the surface of Japan's yokai catalogue. We could speak of the kappa, a water goblin that drags an unwary into rivers, or the yuki onna, the beautiful yet deadly snow woman who appears on winter nights. But what is important is how ingrained these beings were in everyday thinking. They were not official Shinto deities enshrined in the imperial pantheon, yet they were part of the lived tradition of the people. A farmer might give a token offering at a known Tengu rock to stay safe, or parents might tell their children not to go near the lakes to avoid kappa. The boundary between a yokai and Shinto kami is quite fluid. Some yokai became worshipped as minor kami over time, and some kami, especially local nature deities, have folk tales that show them behaving much like yokai would. And there's a bit of fluidity in that. It shows the inclusive nature of Shinto. It's a less strict theology, and more of a collection of beliefs and practices, ones that acknowledge all sorts of spiritual forces. And so demonology then wasn't a separate, occult law. It was woven into Shinto shrine traditions, local superstitions, and of course, popular entertainment. Given this plethora of demons, ghosts, and everything in between acknowledged in the Shinto tradition, how did the Japanese historically safeguard themselves and seek peace? Well, the answer lies in the rituals, the charms, and of course the specialists dedicated to spiritual protection and purification. Shinto at its core is a religion of ritual rather than one of doctrine. Let me explain. Many of its rituals serve to prevent or expel what we might call demonic influences, though the Japanese would often say impurity, something along those lines. So let's look at a few of the key practices and see if we can make sense of them. First, we have purification rituals, which are called harae. And we've touched on them a little bit as a fundamental concept. But in practice, Shinto ceremonies always begin with purification. This can be as simple as worshippers washing hands and rinsing mouths at the shrine's basin, which is called a temizuya, by the way, to remove ordinary defilement before approaching the kami. On a larger scale, the grand purification, or harae, remember that respective o prefix, is performed nationwide at shrines in June and December, intended to cleanse the community of sins and misfortunes accrued over the half-year. In the O harae, a priest recites the Great Purification Prayer, listing sins and impurities to be purged. Among these are not only ethical misdeeds but also calamities like illness and crop failure, implicitly treating them as caused by spiritual pollution. Often a large wreath of woven grasses called a chinoa is set up and people walk through it in a figure-8 pattern, symbolically casting off impurity. And all of this is to ensure that any malign spirit or demonic influence that might have attached itself to individuals or the community is neutralized and sent on its merry way. The belief is that by renewing purity, one naturally repels evil, since evil cannot cling where cleanliness, both physical and spiritual, prevails. Well, then we have ofuda and omamori. These are kind of like talismans, a very direct way that Shinto helps people ward off bad spirits is through talismanic objects. Ofuda are paper or wood amulets issued by shrines, inscribed with the name of a deity or a powerful phrase. And these are placed in the home, often at the household shrine or in the doorway to invite the kami's protection. For instance, a family might get an ofuda from a shrine known to guard against fire, if they fear their home might be susceptible to such disasters. There was even a deity for that, etc. Atago Gongen, originally a fire-controlling spirit. On the other hand, omamori are small charm pouches one can carry, for various blessings like safe travels or good health. Inversely, they serve to ward off accidents and illness, which might be viewed as caused by evil influences. Historically, people also used items like shimenawa, that is, sacred ropes with paper streamers tied around houses or villages. These indicate a purified space that bad spirits should not enter, kind of like a keep-out sign. The use of such charms is a tacit acknowledgement that the world is full of these unseen forces, and it's wise to use a bit of spiritual armor. But when a specific haunting or possession occurred, sometimes more direct intervention was called for. Japan had, and still has, specialists that are akin to exorcists. Shinto priests can perform ceremonies to pacify a particular spirit. For example, if someone feels haunted by a deceased person, a priest may conduct a ritual to call that spirit and persuade it to move on peacefully. In addition, there have traditionally been itinerant mystics and shamans, often outside the formal shrine system. And one famous figure from the Heian era is the Onryō, as mentioned earlier, who belonged to the bureau of the yin-yang in the imperial court. Onryō, like the legendary Abe no Seimei, were masters of astrology and spellcraft. They would craft protective spells and wards, and perform exorcisms side by side with Shinto rites. When Onryō is not Shinto per se, it was employed to guard the emperor and capital from evil spiritual forces, complementing the shrine's practices. But for the common folk, there were miko, or spirit mediums, often women in the Shinto tradition, who could become possessed by a deity or speak or convey its will. Some miko specialized in kamikakushi, that is, spirit retrieval, if someone was thought to be taken by spirits, or perhaps in fox exorcisms for kitsune. In rural areas, Yamabushi, mountain ascetics affiliated with the Shugendo, a mix of Shinto and esoteric Buddhism, were famous for their magical prowess too. They carried conch shells and performed loud rites to scare off demons, or used sacred talismans from the mountain deities. The existence of such roles shows that dealing with demons was recognized as a part of spiritual life. When something fearful or weird happened, you'd want to call in the experts, who knew the diagnostics and cures in a demonological sense. Also, let's talk about the community festivals and folk customs. We had many local festivals, matsuri as they're called, even if joyful on the surface, that had roots in demon-chasing rites. For instance, some autumn festivals where men parade in fearsome masks could trace back to the rituals to scare away pests from crops or evil from the villagers at year's end. A notable example is the Namahage custom in Akita. On New Year's Eve, young men dress as monstrous, ogre-like figures and visit houses shouting admonitions. Though it looks like a scary prank, it's actually a folk ritual, symbolizing demons being tamed. The household offers sake to appease the demons, and in return the demons bless the home for the year. It's both entertainment and exorcism, all in one. Now, at times, certain kami were invoked to combat particular demons of misfortune. For example, During epidemics, people might pray to the Gozu Tenno, a deity associated with warding off pestilence, interestingly syncretized with Susanoo, the storm god, in some shrines like Kyoto's Gion Shrine. Likewise, if locusts threatened crops, a shrine might hold a rite addressing the spirit of the locusts, essentially asking the insect devils to spare them. In all these the pattern holds, recognizing even the pest as having a spiritual aspect, a demon that can be negotiated with or subdued by the authority of a stronger kami. And so by the Edo period, many of these practices were well systematized. Exorcism and protective rites were not fringe magic, but part of common shrine services. For instance, families would regularly bring their newborns at a certain age to the shrine for the Omiya Mairi, infant presentation, to have their baby blessed and any evil warded off. Similarly, individuals turning ages 42 for men and 33 for women, considered yakudoshi, unlucky years, still often go to shrines for yakubarai, a purification to clear away the misfortune that might be attached to those ages. These customs show that underlying belief. Misfortune isn't some random thing. It has a spiritual cause or demon lurking, and thus can be averted by spiritual skill. And that's where we come to the end of our talk on Shinto/Japanese demonology. We had good fun, didn't we? Well, I did anyway. I'm going to thank my top-tier patrons and supporters. That's Kimberly, Christine, Sally, Ember, Susan, Cameron, Carrie, Charlene, Lynn, Therese, Katiana, Nicholas, Ulvanir, Alexander, Charles, Christine, Dr. Neuronerd, Aaron, Jaden, Jim, Jeffrey, Jessica, Madeline, Melissa, Orthodox Review, Scott, Shell, Wendy, Josie, Sarah, Ryan, Thor, Cameron, Stephen, Kevin, HMSH Change, Crystal, Talbury, Anthony, Lucy, Brandon, Gugu Bubonic, Nicholas, Craig, Neftis, Alexander, Gokhan, Dorsey, Vanita, Claire, Courtesy, Carol, Robert, Mary, Bridget, Nefertari, Yvette, Miss Mochi, 11, Allison, Free American, Jennifer, Brittany, David, Cody, Brian, and Are You My Mom? That was what the username was, so, yeah. Okay, well that's it from me. Thank you very much for watching. Tell your friends and family about me. Hell, even tell your enemies about me. And lots of love to you all. Good night. Farewell for now.